Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A. It is April 27th, 2021. So I posted the thread today and I'm doing the video today, so I have less questions. I did this intentionally so I could kind of catch the video quickly after the thread and wouldn't have super duper long video, but they're good questions nonetheless. First one, how do you go about learning to program based on volume and intensity? People throw around terms like minimum effective volume, but where do you start as a baseline? Or how do you know how or when to add volume? As well, how do you know how to count volume? Working set is a working set, but what about drop sets, supersets, feeder sets, etc.? Okay, so let me try to break this down into some simple terms. This is like a really big topic, but I think there's probably a pretty simple way we can go about it. And I will say that it definitely depends on the person. So some basic terms first. So like, minimum effective volume. That would be the amount of volume, minimum amount you could get away with and elicit the effect, right, that you want, which would be hypertrophy, essentially, or like maximum recoverable volume. And these are terms that have been made up because we're trying to describe something. But there isn't going to be like an exact number. But, maximum recoverable volume would be, just exactly as it sounds, the max amount you're going to basically recover from and not be overtaxed. There are some things that we need to consider. One, a beginner's minimum effective volume is going to be less than an advanced person's minimum effective volume. What I mean by that is a beginner needs to do far less than an advanced person to elicit an effect, aka grow muscle. What that also means is for a beginner versus an advanced, there's probably a smaller window of minimum effectiveness and overreaching, right? We're gonna go sticky note. We're gonna have two different lines. So what you're gonna see, two different spaces, okay? Top line, bottom line. You'll see here, beginner line, this would be anything below this, not going to elicit effect. It's not enough. It's not enough stimulus, okay? Anything basically in this range, that's enough. Here's your minimum effective volume. Anything below that, I don't know why I drew that line. It doesn't really matter that much. Anything below that, not enough stimulus. Anything above this line in this range, that is enough to elicit hypertrophy. Anything past this line, we would be overreaching, eventually overtraining. Same thing. Now, you'll see a difference for your advanced. Anything below this line back here, that's not enough stimulus. But what you'll see is that the window here between minimum effective and maximum recoverable, I guess we'll call it, is smaller. And the reason for that is because, while they are more advanced, so they need more stimulus to create the response, but they also still have a ceiling, right? So your beginner person could pretty much do, really like anywhere on the spectrum, they're going to have a positive response. It could be low end of the spectrum. It could be high end of the spectrum. They're going to have a positive response. Now, they're going to need more to get the response, but they're also going to have a smaller window between enough and too much. So that's something to keep in mind. You asked, how do we start as a baseline? Well, that information right there would be very relevant to how you start as a baseline. So for a beginner, or even we'll say beginner, novice, intermediate, advanced. I know novice and beginner are kind of similar terms, but beginner and novice, we're doing, a few sets for smaller muscle groups, maybe a little bit more than that for a larger muscle group per week at a minimum intensity that we need to elicit a response. You're good. You're making progress. What is that intensity? It's not that much. You're going to see different people say different amounts. We're talking a few reps in reserve or so is probably enough to elicit that. Yeah, for a beginner, you got a lot of leeway there. For a more advanced, we're going to have to do a couple things, right? Either need more volume, we do need more volume, essentially. But how do we create that volume? So that's another thing we can talk about here, too. For simplicity's sake, let's talk about volume as a total workload. Sets plus reps plus, and whatever, right? We just got like everything, our workload. Over time, you ask like, how do you increase that? If you got stronger over time, then you are essentially increasing volume. I mean, if you're doing 3 sets of squats, you do 225 on the bar for 10. That's, however much volume. I'm not going to calculate it in my head. It's however much volume you do. The next time you do 3 sets of 10 for 230 pounds, you have added 5 pounds times 10 reps times 3 sets. You've adding another set to that would potentially add even more volume, right? Adding load could be a way. Adding more sets could be a way. Adding more reps could be a way. You think of reps. So, if we're doing 225 times 10 times 3 sets, okay? Next time, 225 times 11 times 3 sets. You've now lifted 225 pounds one more time on each set. You've added 675 pounds of volume, or however you want to calculate it, right? There's multiple ways that you can kind of break that down. Now, how does any of this really relate to an individual? For a beginner, or I will say our beginner, novice, or maybe even our intermediate, any of the schemes will work. Even if you started at a volume that was too low, as long as you ramped it up, you're eventually going to be ramping into volume that is enough to create a response. Same with load, same with anything else. Now, in your advanced, this is where things get trickier. However, by the time someone's advanced, we should also have a lot more idea in terms of how they recover, what they respond best to, everything, right? And we should know by that point. That is why these rules will get bent a little bit, and that's why I can't say you need this much exact weight, or this many exact sets, and so on and so forth. Just find a base and build on it. And there are also body parts that will respond to different things. I mean, I have clients that they train less volume on their upper body, but their legs need a bunch of volume. And these are advanced people, right? This is stuff that they've just learned, or we've just learned over time. That's a hard one to answer. There needs to be a lot of context before we really know that. But like I said, for like beginner, novice, maybe even intermediate, don't complicate it. Have a base, build on it somehow, accumulate volume somehow. You will likely progress. If you're training with enough intensity, you're likely going to progress. The other part of the question was, how do things like drop sets, supersets, and stuff feed into or go into the volume? I mean, if they're at in sufficient intensity, I'd still pretty much count them as sets, right? Feeder sets. I mean, a feeder set is a lot of feeder sets. If we're talking about like warm-ups, I'm not sure what they're saying feeder set as, like what that term actually means to this person, but that might not be enough. That's where some programs get deceiving. You take like a lower volume program, but that's very, very heavy weight. Well, a lot of the time it requires like 4, 5, 6 warm-up sets. Some of those reps are going to be sufficient to be considered working volume, right? So it's not like the volume's as low as people make it out to be. So, I mean, there's so much nuanced stuff in here that terms get kind of tricky. So start with the base, build on the base, learn about recovery. Are you progressing? Are you not? There are times to complicate things, and there are times that it's just not necessary. So that's about all I can say without like context and without making things confusing, and then also without putting my foot in my mouth here, because I'm just making like general statements, and I don't really know who I'm addressing, right? Follow-up question: what are the main areas to focus on if you want to become an online coach? Wow. Oh boy. Well, I mean, there's a lot more that goes into being good at that job than you think, or than people may think if they've never done it. The knowledge is first. I mean, if you don't have the knowledge, it doesn't matter. I mean, you could be a marketing genius and surely get clients, but if you don't have knowledge, you don't retain them, and you eventually just fall apart. So the knowledge is one. Experience / knowledge. I mean, in the beginning, you're working for cheap, maybe even doing stuff for free. You have to learn. You have to get experience. It's a must, absolute must. Give myself a little plug in there too, doing things like the education and mentorship programs that I offer that will expedite the process. But even then, with those types of people that I'm working with, are still putting through like real life situations and stuff like that's getting experience, and then they're implementing it with their own clients. So it's not like you can really replace that. So that's 100% number one. That outweighs everything, not even close. No real way to argue that. Customer service is important too. I would say this: if word of mouth is not your biggest driver of new client inquiries, you're doing something wrong. I mean, even if you're marketing, like marketing, like I market, I guess, kind of like it's more so like passively, right? It's like I put out information, I talk about clients, and I may advertise, I may put up like hey, I'm having this class, or mentorship service or whatever. But it's not like marketing like a big company would market a product. It's not, it's not like that. It's not like paid ads, or that is important. I mean, it might be important, but really, even then, a lot of my clients, most of my clients still come from word of mouth. And that's because if you treat people right, and you tend to get more referrals, right? That's even with people that aren't currently with you. I get referrals from people that are, referrals from people that were a client like 5 years ago or 6 years ago. I had a referral from someone that was a client like, like 9 years ago. It was like way back when I was, way early in coaching. So yeah, you just have to do right by people, and don't burn bridges, and just remember that they will talk, and that's good for business. It is good for business if you're doing things right. Really, those two things outweigh everything else. If you had zero marketing business model or experience or anything, and you did those two things well, your business will grow. How long will it take to grow? Well, it might take a while, but it will grow. I had zero marketing experience when I started coaching. I put out information. I still don't have a lot of marketing experience. I just figured out things that work, and I don't really like market in the traditional sense, like I said. And the business stuff you just kind of learn along the way. Those two things 100% are most important. There's nothing that replaces those two things. I don't care what anyone says. They can argue with me about it, whatever. It's fine. I know there's a lot of people out there that market their coaching dialogue and their funnels and all that stuff, and that's fine. Like, whatever people want to do. I understand it can be difficult to get clients, but ultimately, if all you're doing is talking the talk and you can't walk the walk, then it's not going to last. How does stress play into weight loss? I understand the general concept, but on what scale does that truly play a part? Largely or only slightly? Depends on how much stress. Right? Are we talking chronic stress? Or are we talking stress that's accumulated? So a lot of the people that I would say have a problem losing, or that seem to have the traditional weight loss resistance because of stress, it's not stress. It's not like I had a stressful day at work, or like we had something happened in the family, or like a big stressor has popped up. No, it is they have chronically stressed their body out for a long period of time, and that might be 8 months, maybe, might be 8 years, might be 20 years, or whatever. I see all different time frames. So how does that play into it? Well, again, like I said, how chronic is it? The adaptions and the negative downstream things that occur will occur based on essentially like how much stress there is and for how long. Basic things would be like contest prep. Even if you're healthy in the contest prep, there's some metabolic adaptation. There's usually like less T4 conversion into T3. Leptin levels go down. Metabolic rate slows down. Those things happen to healthy people. So what can you do? You can do things like refeeding. You can just eat less, take stuff away. You have to do that to some extent, right? Or to a large extent in some people. And it will work. But could you take a chronically stressed person and just inevitably just keep taking more and more and more food, and then they eventually lose weight? Yeah, sure. They would eventually lose weight. You would eventually create a calorie deficit no matter how much adaptation is there. However, in some of these people, you'd literally be eating like 400 or 500 calories a day because everything's just so resistant. Also they're just extremely inflamed and stuff too. So like weight is the word we're using, right? So you do have the thyroid adaptation, like we said. You do have the leptin adaptation, like we said. These are basic things. You have other things that are going, progesterone is going down, right, with this stress response. That's causing irregularities in menstrual cycle. Does that mean you can't lose weight? No. We start seeing other hormonal irregularities starting to happen too, with the estrogen to progesterone ratios, how many androgens they have, their cortisol and their adrenals. What starts happening? Their performance goes down, their activity goes down. They do all these things, and you can definitely just outwork it for a while. I mean, shoot, I've seen people just completely buried, and they've just basically outworked it and willed themselves to keep doing it forever. But what will generally happen is what it took them to lose weight 2-3 years ago, it's taking more and more and more and more. You're just digging the hole deeper and deeper and deeper. Now we also think about like on an epigenetic level. What I mean is basically, the switches flipping on and off, these switches that would allow us to lose fat and would allow us or would cause these adaptations. Easiest way to explain it would be you need to convince your body it's okay to lose weight. It's in a chronically stressed state. Does it want to let go of body fat? Not really. So, I mean, you could just lose muscle. You could just lose more muscle and look worse. Or when you try to when you try to go into a calorie deficit, these switches and these adaptations, they happen quicker, right? So you'd see this in someone that's dieted too many times in too short of a period of time. And this is even if they like properly reverse diet or I'm not going to say properly, but they, reverse diet, if you want to call it that word, or their calories are much, much higher if they've just bumped the calories up quickly. Let's use a scenario. They've competed, they've tried to get lean a few years in a row. Number 1, year goes okay. Number 2, gets a little harder. Number 3, a little harder. Number 4, it's like, dang, I really can't lose weight. Really, I'm just having a really hard time. It's not working anymore. So what's happening? Well, these adaptations are occurring a lot quicker, right? Because there was not adequate time. And even though between year 3 and 4, you might have still built your calories up in between there, when you go to pull them back down, that adaptation's happening like that. It's happening like that, whereas before it took a little while before that adaptation started kicking in, right? So you're having a harder and harder time getting ahead of the adaptations. The stuff that you're doing before gets less and less effective. Your refeeding gets less and less effective. Your calorie cuts get less and less effective. Yeah, like I said, you could just starve and you would lose weight. There's no caloric balance is going to win, but at what cost, right? Are you digging just further and further hole? Yeah, it plays a huge part. Very, very large part. I mean, it's everything. I mean, every hormonal, let's say 95% of hormonal GI types issues, weight loss resistance, all that stuff that I encounter, there's a stress component. Their body is stressed out. That's literally why everything happens, because their body is stressed out. Now, what is it stressed out from? It could be psychological, it could be physical, emotional, whatever, but it's there. And it's stress. I mean, stress is what's causing all of these adaptations. It's literally from chronic stress exposure in whatever form that it's in. What scale does it truly play a part? Largely or only slightly? Very largely. It's all of it. It's the whole thing, pretty much. It's more or less the whole thing. In a short-term acute situation, it's far less. Yeah, it's far, far less. But in a longer-term situation where it's getting harder and harder, it's most of the problem. I should also say too that it's accumulated, it's allostatic load, like accumulation of stress load over time. Just because you're not stressed right at this moment doesn't mean that the 5 years that you beat the shit out of your body didn't add up and now you're not in a big hole. So keep that in mind. All right, last one. Love to hear about your choice to pursue DC training. What are your thoughts on the training principles, your experience, and why you decided to change training programs? I did use the pretty much staple, the traditional style DC training. A workout, B workout, A workout, B workout. It was like A1, A1, B1, A2, B2, 3 days a week, 2-way split, so on and so forth. So I used it for a few reasons. Calories, burns less calories, more time recovering. Calories are already very, very high. That was part of the issue. I did not want to expend a bunch more calories. That helped. Time was of the essence, especially with my schedule and workload and all that. So time helps. It helped with that for sure. Even though now I'm not doing DC per se, I'm 4 days a week, but my training's not super time consuming still, even now. Psychology, I think it just suited me well, like the way that I like to train. It's a basic system. The premise of it is basic. There are certainly nuances and things that you would have to do to modify based on you, but it's basic in principle. You get stronger, you deload when you are beat up, repeat. I made a lot of progress with it, to be completely honest. So yeah, time, caloric expenditure was certainly a factor. Psychology was a factor. Also, the recovery portion is a huge focus, and to me, that's very, very important. And it's always been a struggle with me to fully recover, especially from a nervous system standpoint. I like to train that hard, like you would see in that program. So if I'm doing it 5 days a week, that's a lot. That's just a lot on the nervous system. Whereas 3 days, I could recover, and that just allowed for even better performance. So just a huge focus on recovery made a big difference. There's about 4 points right there where that kind of swayed me towards it. I think the training principles work as long as your form is good and you're stimulating the muscle and you're not just getting stronger by compensating by breaking down form. Yeah, you get stronger within hypertrophy rep ranges and you make progress. It's one of the simplest training, basically like progression schemes that you could follow. You really don't get any more simple than that. Does it maybe add as much volume in as like literally adding sets into your workout? No, it does not. But it is still something that can work 100%. If you can program the exercises in a way that works for you and you're recovering enough and so on and so forth, it can definitely still work. I just would figure out like is this a program type or is this a structure that works for the person or just makes sense for the person? And that's only something that you could answer based on each individual. So I hope that helps. Thank you for all the questions this week. This is a really good video. I know there was only a handful of questions, but they were pretty long to answer, so that worked out well. I will talk to you guys next